Hi everyone. This evening, today we're going to be looking at research philosophies. Uh, research philosophies, and what are research philosophies? Research philosophies simply refer to beliefs that we have about the way in which data about a phenomenon should be gathered, analyzed, and used. That is, um, research philosophy is closely um, tied to the purpose of your research. Uh, Regardless of whatever topic you have or that you're looking at to study or to investigate, you um, have to have a philosophy that would guide you in actually carrying out that study. Because one thing that is important in the research process is how you go about gathering the data, and research philosophy is foundational to how you would collect the data, what type of data you would collect, and how you would analyze that data, uh, and for what, and how you would use the data that you would have collected. So let me give you an example. Let's say, hypothetically, just like the previous example that we've used or have used in the past, which talks about um, disability services, the qualifications of those that provide disability services in universities. We wanted to look at the study, essentially looked at um, disability services on campus and the individuals that provide those services. What type of qualifications do they have? Um, and do they have the right qualifications and experience to actually um, carry out the services that are needed in disability services provided on campus? And so, if you wanted to operationalize that study, there are two ways that you could go about it, or there are several ways that you could go about it. You could do a survey, which is using questionnaires to collect information um, from people that work in the disability offices. And that questionnaire could have sections that ask about the people's demographic information. For instance, their age, their qualification, years of experience, the academic discipline from which they emerge. Um, and a survey can actually do that. Another way is to do that same study qualitatively. Um, and we could do either focus groups or interviews where we would um, recruit people that are actually working in these offices and interview them about the types of services they provide and what type of educational backgrounds they have and what are the overall needs of the students and how does that fit into the qualification and experiences that they have. And so a research philosophy um, is that guide that you would have that helps you to kind of like put a framework over your study in terms of the data collection, data analysis, and interpretation of the data. So the next thing that we would look at uh, is the different types of research philosophies that we have that are out there and that you could also use when you start to do your own research studies. The first one is what we call the um, positivism philosophy, and this philosophy is the one that's mainly used in the natural or social sciences. Um, and the focus of this philosophy is on seeking the facts, um, and because the philosophy believes that um, that there is an actual truth that is out there, and that whatever um, information or knowledge we're trying to get at, that there are facts or there is concrete, exact, precise, and absolute information that's out there that we could get that would help us to answer the queries that we have. And so the positivism approach is the one that you find in the physical sciences, let's say like physics and chemistry, where if someone makes an observation about something, then they would go out and get some type of material and then take it to the lab and test it and analyze it to get the results that they want. Um, the positivism philosophy is very objective. Uh, and so um, when this approach is used, especially in the physical sciences, uh, there is some bit of preciseness. You could draw your own inferences, but those inferences has to also be validated by others. Whatever measures that you use, whatever procedures that you use have to be precise and be in accordance with what others have used in the past. Um, but in the social sciences, objectivity is much harder to achieve than in the natural sciences, because in the natural sciences we could use we could use experiments to either prove or disprove whatever hypothesis that we lay. But in the social sciences, that's not feasible. So what we could have at the end of the day is whether we would use some type of empirical information, which is something that that's data that we collect through our senses or through observations or through questions that we ask people to verify. And so, although there is some bit of objectivity, it's not as much compared to the physical sciences. In essence, positivism is based on this idea that science is the only way to learn about truth, and that if there is something we're trying to gain knowledge about, then we have to gain that knowledge by getting um, some type of facts. And this could be through measurements, through observations, or by whatever means that we have to use using the senses. Um, and and in for people that ascribe to this philosophy, there is this belief that factual knowledge can only be gained through observation using the senses or through measurement, and that any other method could not be accepted. And people that ascribe to this philosophy also adopt what we call a deductive approach. A deductive approach emphasizes that you would develop an hypothesis first based on an existing theory, and then you will design what we call a research strategy to test that theory. And there are several theories that are out there. Like in the physical sciences, we have a theory um, about the law of gravity that states that whatsoever goes up must come down. Uh, and so if you throw a stone up, there is that expectation that given all the normal conditions that stone would fall down. Um, and so the positivism approach has to be backed up with some type of theory. It's not something that you just make an observation. When you make an observation, you have to have it connected to some type of theory, and then you would design your research strategy around that and test it to see whether the theory is valid in certain circumstances that you put the theory through. The second one that research philosophy that is out there is called phenomenology. And so the phenomenological approach is adopted mostly by people in the social sciences, like sociology, social work, psychology, and all of that. And the argument of this approach is that the physical sciences deals with objects that are exclusive or sort of like independent of human beings. What that means in essence is that um, they're not considering the emotional component. We're not considering the human actions that sort of like interact with whatever observations we're making. And so the phenomenological experience tend to focus on the experiences. Um, it kind of like looks at something in such a way that it looks at what the thought processes are, uh, what informs the human behavior within the context in which the information is looked at. Whereas in the positivism approach or philosophy, we don't think about the emotions necessarily. We would have to just manipulate whatever variables we have and arrive at a conclusion that we're trying to draw. This approach also argues that there is an interrelationship between the researcher and what is being researched, that you can't separate the two because you're the one making the observation. Sometimes you would have to make judgment, and those judgment has to be based maybe on your experiences. It has to be based on how you perceive the context, and each of us perceive things differently. Therefore, the phenomenological approach is concerned with understanding human behavior from the researcher's own frame of mind. And if we are to extend that statement, it will mean that everybody sees things differently. If he has two people to observe something, each and everybody would come away with different interpretations of whatever they've seen or observed. And this approach is used mostly in qualitative study, and there is that emphasis, or there is that note that there is some bit of subjectivity because of um, the fact that each person perceives reality differently. Uh, Another aspect of this philosophy is that um, there is a focus on the meaning um, that the researcher gives to whatever has been observed, rather than the measurements that we give, rather than the precise measurements, but how does the researcher interpret, how does the researcher give meaning to what they observe. And so, if we compare these two side by side, we would see that there are several differences, and I'm not going to go over them because it's rather lengthy, and you could go over them and make. And this is not an exhaustive list by any chance, but no, this kind of like gives you an idea of the differences between the two. And in terms of how it is operationalized, how it is carried out, positivism approach would use things like questionnaires and surveys, whereas in phenomenological approach, we could use things like interviews and case studies because we're trying to derive meaning. The next philosophy that we have is what we call constructivism, which assumes that all knowledge is constructed from the learner's previous knowledge, personal experiences, or their interpretation of the environment itself. This is similar to the phenomenological approach, but the thing that is different about this one is that it has this component that focuses on learning, which is that as people learn, they would continuously test whatever hypothesis that they have through what we call social negotiation. So, in terms of when you gain an experience about something through learning, sometimes whatever previous knowledge you have may be displaced because you find that you have new facts now. Uh, and so, whatever old assumptions or ideas that you have about that, will be displaced by the new one. The other thing also is that each person has a different interpretation and construction of the knowledge process. So each person learns differently, and each person brings past experiences and cultural factors to the situation. And so, if you have someone that's a Caucasian and someone that's an African American, and their life experiences are different, then that's the way that they will learn. Uh, then that's the way that they would interpret whatever they're learning. Uh, Another one, which is the last one, is the critical theory. And the critical theory posits that people's social constructions are shaped by the socio-cultural, political, and historical